Welcome to this week's edition of Outdoors Online, a weekly webcast produced by the North Dakota Game and Fish Department. I'm your host, Mike Anderson. My guest this week is Wildlife Division Chief Jeb Williams. Today we're going to talk about the upcoming firearms deer season. Jeb, what can hunters expect this year compared to last year?
We did have an increase of licenses this year compared to last year, approximately 650 licenses more this year than last year, and so that's a good thing. I mean, anytime we're going in an increase route rather than decrease route, that's good, although it's not a real big step as far as increase. It's pretty modest, but again, we feel like we're going in the right direction versus going the decrease route, which we did for a number of years.
Okay, how are whitetail deer numbers doing?
So anecdotally, around the state, what we're hearing from other hunters, what we're seeing from our field staff, and in the summer months and early fall months, our field staff are running a number of different surveys for other species, but we also collect some anecdotal reports and information, and we're really hearing some good things across the board as far as what deer numbers look like and what the reproduction looked like for whitetail deer numbers in North Dakota. And so we're hopeful that that is going to be the case, and that folks that have a license this year are going to have an adequate opportunity to harvest that deer, and then moving forward, hopefully we can even see some increase in deer numbers in some of those areas that have been struggling.
Your crews just finished the fall aerial survey for mule deer. What did they find?
Yeah, literally just finished that up. Just actually just getting some numbers finalized, those types of things. So yeah, every fall the big game staff with our department look at fall mule deer surveys, which looks at mule deer reproduction, how that went, and the numbers that have been rolling in. Again, numbers are still being in the process of finalized, but overall looks pretty good. Overall numbers looks fairly comparable to last year, which I mean, we think we're in good shape, pretty good shape mule deer wise. Actually, reproduction looked like it was maybe even a little bit better than last year. The health situation as far as the buck to doe ratio looks healthy, looks good, looks improved even from last year, and so overall we still feel like we're in a good spot for mule deer populations, and looking at even some mule deer growth out there, growth population for the population in general, which of course means to additional licenses down the road. So we feel like, again, we're in a pretty good place right now with mule deer.
Why do they fly that survey at this time of year, Jeb?
This time of year, it has to be late enough where most of the leaves are off in the Badlands, because it's low level flying, and obviously you're flying in these survey blocks that have been in our survey system for over 50 years, and you want that consistency in place, which we definitely have, but then you also want those conditions to be as good as possible. So having as little leaf cover this time of year is best, and so right around the middle part of October is usually when we start seeing that process happen. Okay,
what's the long-term goal for deer licenses?
So in 2015, and I guess I should back up a little bit and just talk about our system that we have in place there, where we really involve the public in the process as far as the long-term goal setting of where we want the deer population to be. We do look then at mule deer numbers specifically in the long-term goal setting, as well as whitetail or any of our units where we have whitetail deer numbers, or we have any numbers, those different types of things. It's all encompassing of our deer population in the state, and then our various license distribution in the state as well. So we look at that every 5 years, okay. And we're getting close to another round of that in 2020. Will be again when we'll look at that license goal setting, and the last goal we had was 75,000. I'm not sure we're going to get there. We have a couple years. This year, having licenses at 55,150. We've got a little ways to go before we would get to 75,000. I'm not sure that that's possible within 2 years, but it won't be the first time that we have not achieved, or maybe in some years we've actually overachieved that number too. So it's a gauge that what we like to look at and what we feel is maybe realistic, and but there has to be some things in place there to be able to get to there.
Right. Well, at least the numbers are going in the right direction. But what's it going to take to get to that 75,000?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question. And in North Dakota, there's some things that we have more control over than others. One of them being weather, obviously, that we don't have any control over. And we all know in North Dakota weather does play a role. Definitely does have an impact on what deer numbers can look like on the landscape. Can certainly have some tough winter mortality when you have tough winter weather, but then that also impacts the reproduction as you move forward on that too. So it can really have some impacts both ways. Habitat base, that's something that we have some control over in North Dakota, but we've talked about this a lot over the last several years. There's not as much deer habitat on the landscape as what we had probably 10 to 15 years ago, and that impacts the population growth as well. And so those are some things that are in place there that definitely do impact what those numbers are going to look like moving forward.
Crops also play an important part if hunters are going to see deer. Are the crops coming off?
Row crops are coming off. There was no doubt a little bit of a hiccup for a lot of guys here with the amount of snow that hit the ground a couple weeks ago that probably is going to have an impact, probably going to have a role in some of those crops coming off or some other challenges associated with that. But in areas where conditions are right, there is a lot of row crops coming off even now as we speak, and we're still a couple weeks out from deer gun season. So I think, like always, there's probably going to be some crops that aren't off, just, again, for a variety of reasons every year in North Dakota. But it looks like, anyway, that I would think a good majority of the row crops are probably going to be off by deer season. But, again, that's all it's all impacted by weather conditions, and that could change day to day as far as what those conditions look like.
Any rules or regulations deer hunters should be aware of this fall?
We did have a couple changes, and we've talked about those a fair amount as far as the CWD restrictions, as far as importation, or even in North Dakota when we have people in Unit 3F2 leaving that unit. Previously, there was a rule in place that did allow somebody to take that carcass out of that unit if they were going to a license, to a meat processor, that type of situation. We've just learned so much in the last 10 years of CWD, and none of it's good.
Right.
And so we really felt that we needed to buckle down on a few of those rules to protect North Dakota's deer herd, and one of the ways is doing that by reducing the movement of carcasses coming into North Dakota or even around North Dakota from a CWD unit that we have within the state. So there are some additional rules and regulations to follow there when you're taking a carcass out of 3F2. Essentially, you can't take that carcass out. It can be quartered out, it can be boned out meat, but basically we don't want that brain or that spinal column coming out of 3F2. And very similar too from Montana. We added Montana this year, similar to what we have with other states when they've had CWD, is those rules are going to apply coming back into North Dakota as well.
Okay, so the best thing to do is check the CWD regulations before you go out.
That's correct. And any time you're going to any other state, it's always good to check those different rules and regulations as far as if that state is a CWD state and the important rules of coming back into North Dakota, what you can and cannot have.
Jeb, before we move on, let's remind our viewers, what is chronic wasting disease?
Good idea, Mike. Chronic wasting disease is a contagious neurological disease which impacts whitetail deer, mule deer, moose, and elk, and is always fatal. And once on the landscape, it remains indefinitely.
If you haven't got your deer tag in the mail, there's a good reason. Explain.
Yeah, so one of the base license requirements in North Dakota is to have your general game and habitat license in place. That's always been the case. I think that's important to bring that up, Mike. That has always been the case. That's not new. One of the things that is new, though, is the ability for the department, now that we've gone all electronic licensing, is to be able to quickly identify those individuals that don't have that base license in place. And so the department's, I think, been really doing the best job possible, probably going out of our way to try to notify these individuals to try to get this license purchased so they can have their deer license. And that's something that people have been getting some reminders about, and they're going to get probably one last reminder about that. But then we're pretty close to the deer season to where that's going to be up. So if they want that deer license by opening day, they need to get that purchased, and then so the department has time to get that mailed to them.
So essentially, they need to purchase their general game and habitat license, and then their deer tag will be mailed.
Correct. And so the key factor there, though, is that think about this, is if somebody purchases it the day of deer season, the day before deer season, mail doesn't work that quick. And so they're not going to be able to get that license, that deer license, sent in the mail to them that fast. So people need to plan ahead and get that taken care of as soon as possible, so they make sure they have that deer license in their hands opening day.
Okay, and that's also a reminder for the people that have received their deer tags in the mail.
Yeah, correct. It's one of those things. I know each one of us probably does something a little bit different with their deer license when they get it in the mail.
Right.
And whether you stick it in your gun safe, whether you stick it in your gun cabinet, in your vehicle, wherever. I mean, but it's just locate that, make sure you know where it's at, and actually open it up. Make sure that what's on there is what you think should be on there. Maybe some people might think that should say mule deer buck on there, and it doesn't, or antlered mule deer.
Right.
But anyway, just so it matches up with what they were notified with from the Game and Fish Department and on their notification they received. So just just being responsible and making sure they find that, so it doesn't cause anybody, mostly yourself, any hardships as far as not being able to hunt.
A lot of good information, Jeb. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Like Jeb just mentioned, if you were lucky enough to draw a deer tag this year and you haven't received your tag in the mail, deer hunters are reminded of a state law that requires hunters to purchase a general game and habitat license before receiving their deer tag. The North Dakota Game and Fish will only mail deer tags after the general game and habitat license is purchased. You can purchase the general game and habitat license by going to the Game and Fish website at gf.nd.gov. For Wildlife Division Chief Jeb Williams and the rest of the staff here at the Game and Fish Department, thanks for joining us for this week's Outdoors Online. We'll see you again next week.